Okay, let's take a look at chapter 9, which is the market revolution. Now, you're going to have some factors that's going to drive this, one of which is the population of the United States has doubled. You're going to get the influx of immigrants from several nations. We're going to be talking about Germany, Ireland, Mexico, and the Pacific Rim, namely the Chinese or China. You're also going to get the rise of the middle class because of this. And this is not only socially, but you're also going to get it financially. You're going to get vigorous political democracy. You are looking at transportation in the form of railroads and steamships, which is now going to be able to deliver goods and people over longer distances, especially into the interior of the country. You're going to get communication in the form of technology, and the telegraph, namely. And what this now does is it takes information and makes that a commodity as well. And you'll see where the telegraph and the railroad are synonymous with one another. You'll have both operating in the same strata. You're also going to get industry, technology, and innovation, where producers of goods and services are now able to take advantage of machinery that will make things much more efficiently and much more productively. You definitely will get somewhat of a dichotomy with this technology. You have low-skilled workers and high-skilled workers, and the difference between the two is not only in wage and experience and skill set, but also potential as well. I mentioned earlier with people immigrating to the United States, it's going to be a bastion of cheap labor, and this is going to be in the millions. Then the last part of this, factors, is risk capital. That is where investors are willing to take money and risk it. And much risk capital is going to come from three places. One, internally in the United States. The other one would be Great Britain and, of course, France. And the return is probably going to run anywhere between 10 to 12%, which is an incredible rate of return. Now, looking at immigration, you're going to get it in the form of chain migration. And this is the Germans. And the Germans come over as a family unit, come highly literate, educated. They've pulled their money, skilled workers. They pulled their resources from their community, and such that if they came over, they would quickly try to locate in places where they could exploit their skill sets almost immediately. And in the course of doing that, they set up niche businesses where there was little competition. And this is primarily going to be in the Midwest and the Southwest. You will also get the Irish that will come over as young males, unskilled. The illiteracy, for the most part, is going to be high. Poor, they're located on the East Coast to some extent, the Midwest and West. And much of this is going to be tied to the fact that they're laborers. They don't bring a lot of skills with them. And as a result of that, they're going to be pretty much, not pigeonholed, but they're going to be somewhat limited to working on railroads, mines, and diggers. Now, interestingly with that, if you know anything about politics with regards to New York City and some of the urban centers on the East Coast, eventually the Irish will make inroads in politics. and they'll slowly but surely start to work their way up. Mexicans, for the most part, single male literacy for the most part, illiterate, unskilled, have somewhat of a language barrier, and again, they will migrate towards railroads, mines, and to a large extent, they're going to serve as the bulk of ranching, in the field of ranching, and cowboys. And what you'll see is about 65% of the cowboys will be of Mexican descent. Another 10 to 12% will be African American. This is especially true after the Civil War. And this right here, this is discrimination. Let's talk about the Chinese. Again, poor, illiterate, language barriers. Again, working in railroads, mines, niche jobs, primarily in the Pacific Northwest, the West Coast, and of course they're going to face discrimination as well. Now, these are the groups that came. Now let's take a look at what happened when they basically cobbled together. They just kind of huddled together. Now, assimilation is going to be a key component. How fast do they assimilate into the American culture? When they do arrive, they're going to establish enclaves, which again is just a place where they all gather pretty much together without too much of a mixture. They'll seek niche employment. They will have to, because of discrimination, establish ethnic banks to kind of keep their culture going. They're also going to establish ethnic newspapers. They're going to experience xenophobia, which is the fear of foreigners. And again, you'll get some blowback by the nativists in the sense that there'll be America First societies formed. And of course, much like the Irish and some of these other groups, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants are going to rule. And then lastly, one of the ways to get around the literacy problem is to go to night school, get tutors, or for the most part, self-educate themselves. All right, let's turn the page. Now, one of the things that the American government is going to do is they're going to push, and this is going to come on roughly right around the 18 teens, from about 1812 on up. They're going to look at building something called the American system. This is where they take tax dollars, build roads, build canals, build bridges, and a communication system. And much of this is going to come from public funds, but it's also going to come from private enterprise as well. And there's going to be some ways that we look at this, and one of which is, with examples of it, would be the Erie Canal, 1825. This was done with public funds. It was 365 miles long. Small towns along the canal sprout up because of this. It linked New York City with the Great Lakes, and it was just a boon for commerce of moving people and materials from the Midwest portion of the United States to New York, which eventually would lead to goods and services making it its way across the pond to Europe. It really puts the word new in New York, because New York now becomes a main trade hub on the East Coast in the United States with regards to goods and services to Europe. Now, we mentioned communication earlier. Let's take a look at the telegraph. It's an invention that was developed along with the Morse code simultaneously through the efforts of Samuel Morse. If you've ever seen it operate in a movie or just anything that you would have been watching, you would see that the Morse code itself is based on a series of electric dots and dashes. Now, again, this kind of fits in with what I mentioned earlier with regards to information being a commodity. And of course, Western Union is going to come on board with using this as a commodity. This information comes in the form of weather reports, railroad transportation tables, Indian movements, and buffalo migration. And what you're looking at there is, again, information is now a commodity. And that's, you cannot put enough emphasis on that. Yes, it's information is now a commodity. Now, let's take a look at transportation. The railroad comes online in the United States roughly around the 18 teens, and it was first developed in large scale in England. And what you're basically looking at is England may have had anywhere from like 14 to 15,000 miles of railroad tracks laid down. In the United States, it'll quickly develop to well over 40,000, 60,000, and then eventually it tops 100,000. It opened up Western migration, and again, railroads, believe it or not, as much as people would like to think it was all about movement of people, really it was goods and services first, people second, and then the railroads really did not make a lot of money moving people, and in fact, they're going to get some plenty of help from the American government with regards to trying to take the people movement off their hands. Now, if you know anything about Amtrak's a perfect example of the government getting in the business of moving people to and from. Now, of course, with railroad development, you're also going to get towns sprouting up on both sides of the railroad tracks. Much needed resources, raw materials, coal, water, wood, which is paramount. You're going to need iron ore, and you're also going to need copper. Iron ore for the steel to make the railroad tracks, and then copper for the telegraph wire. Now, how do they build it? They use cheap labor, namely the Irish and the German. And then, of course, I mentioned this earlier. If you mention the railroad, you also have to mention the telegraph. They're synonymous with one another. And again, some people argue there's two things that tame the West: the railroad and then barbed wire, believe it or not. And I'll talk about barbed wire a little bit later on. All right, so let's turn the page. Now, let's take a look at western expansion. And again, this fits along with our discussion of the railroad and communication. And again, it's going to open up the West to migration of vast sums of people. Immigrant and slaves, roughly about 4.5 million between 1790 and 1840. You're also going to have the territories and some states, well, the territories namely, squatters encouraging people to come and take land, not by sale, but just by squatting. And what they're basically doing is encouraging the shift of population, because they're going to need that population base to be able to petition for statehood. So, yeah, they need squatters to pump up their population counts, and it comes even at the expense of people just coming and taking large parcels of land without even paying for it. And the only thing that comes to mind there is the impact that these squatters are going to have on the native populations. Now, something that's kind of reminiscent of when we talked about Thomas Jefferson. Think back to when I mentioned Thomas Jefferson and the Louisiana Purchase. Land was roughly 35 cents an acre. Now it's up to $1.25 an acre, which still in many cases really helps the average citizen, or at least some people, to be able to purchase land. It's just if you think about an acre of land today and you think of an acre of land back then, $1.25 it sounds like a really sweet deal. Well, they purchased an acre or a series of acres. What's the next thing you're going to do? You're going to clear the land. You're going to build homes. You're going to establish a community. And within that community, you're going to build jails and churches. And believe it or not, jails were built before the churches. And then eventually, you can add schools to that list as well. All right, so let's take a look. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. You're going to get some blowback, and this is especially true with regards to Navatism. Backlash over this immigration. Immigrants, some people are going to argue, are going to dilute American culture, American language, American arts, American way of life. They're taking jobs. They're a bad influence, crime, their vigilance, alcohol. What's really sad is you can look at this dialogue of Navatism or their xenophobia, and you can still hear, even today, these same claims. It just seems like this backlash against immigrants is an ongoing thing throughout our history, even though we are, in many cases, a nation of second chances. And we are a nation that was basically built on the back of immigrants, both ones that have come here willfully, and then, of course, there's the African-American slave that was forced to come to America. I guess you could say that was forced migration. All right, the unfree, and this kind of fits in with our dialogue about the slaves. Many slaves are going to be moved westward in the form of slave coffles. You're going to get 2 to 3 million marched westward to places in Louisiana, Mississippi, a little bit of a typo here. It'd be Alabama. And then families were broken up and sold. Just a real detriment with regards to the African American community. Again, here Eli Whitney has invented the cotton gin. The cotton gin takes 10 slaves to make 1 pound of cotton. Now what you have is 2 slaves making 1 pound, which makes cotton even much more profitable. And like they've called cotton before the white gold, it really is the white gold. And again, you are going to get large swaths of African slaves moved westward because of this. All right, so let's take a look at King Cotton. Now, King Cotton is the main product of the South, and with it, you need more land. And if you have more land, you can grow more cotton. And synonymous with this, you're also going to need more slaves. And this is important to our story in the sense that it predicated what we now know to be exacerbating westward expansion with regards to the movement of slaves. We talked about the connection with technology and Eli Whitney's cotton gin. These slave coffles, the technology, is going to start to create sectional issues, especially with northern states wanting to promote abolitionist, the abolitionist movement. You have politicians in Washington, D.C. going back and forth because the South obviously wants to maintain the status quo. And that status quo includes the plantation system and slavery. Now, with the sectional issues, you have Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, and South Carolina. And then, of course, you can add Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi in there. They are going to serve as the main cadre of southern states resisting any type of reforms. And it starts and ends with slavery. Now, monetarily, what you're looking at is the same region is going to export roughly about 70% of its cotton overseas. And this means it ends up in the hands of Great Britain. And in the form of textiles. And that cannot be emphasized enough. One thing to consider, Great Britain is going to have roughly $6 million invested in cotton in the South. And this is roughly $100 million all the way up until the time of the Civil War. Now, just to kind of give you some numbers of the productivity, 5 million in 1793, and it jumps all the way up to 540 in 1860, just to kind of show you the productivity of cotton production. And again, the North, even though they profess they profess that they detest slavery and all its vestiges, they are also going to be a predominant customer with regards to the cotton. And they are what they are called in many circles the lords of loom. And that's going to be very prevalent throughout the Civil War. Even with the Civil War raging, the South was still trying to get cotton to both Great Britain and the North with regards to textiles production. Now, interestingly enough, during the same period, you're going to get the Upper South starting to diversify its economy, and it's going to start selling its slaves to the Lower South. And they're kind of looking to the future. Now, with market innovations, at the same time, you get commercial hubs along rivers and canals. Again, risk capital, banks and insurance companies investing. You have technology, and this is again in the form of fertilizers, seeds. You get the steel plow replacing the wooden plow, which enables farmers to cut through the soil faster and in much larger quantities. You get the reaper by Cyrus McCormick that allows wheat farmers who typically grow spring wheat, summer wheat, and fall wheat and winter wheat, which basically there's like 4 seasons, much more efficiently and much more productivity. And the nice thing about this, what you're looking at, is the reaper is going to replace, not necessarily replace, but you won't need as much manual labor. Imagine yourself with a sickle out in a wheat field cutting it down by hand, and now you have a horse-driven device can now do it 10 times faster than you would do with a sickle. You also have somewhat of an industrial revolution underway in the United States, and this is going to come in the form of the factory system. You have a man by the name of Samuel Slater who comes from England. He is going to bring technology with him, not in a physical sense, but in an intellectual sense, and he is going to invent something called the spinning jenny. And this is going to basically put the United States on the map with regards to textiles. And what you're going to end up with is piecework out of a machine instead of by hand. And this is really important because now you are going to put not necessarily the cottage industry out of business, but you're going to start removing more and more materials made by hand, and now they're going to be made by machines. And it's not only more efficient and more productive, but it's also going to make things cheaper. And again, this is kind of the innovations of how our industrial revolution started. Now, there's going to be some things that are going to kind of exacerbate this. One of which is going to be the War of 1812 and the embargo of 1807. Now, this embargo is when we basically cut off goods from Europe in retaliation from in the impressment and unfair trade between Great Britain and France. And in the course of doing this, we now end up with some homespun industries actually for the first time willing to invest the money and the energy and the know-how into direct competition with Europe. And there's these little gaps created by the War of 1812 and the embargoes that allowed American businesses to take off. Now, just some nuances with regards to the factory system. People were standing in workstations, and this is especially true with women and children. They started to make more and more weapons, tools, shoes, clothes, and agricultural machinery. Eli Whitney is going to turn around and introduce interchangeable parts, and this is especially true with rifles. What he basically did is he went to the War Department and he introduced a machine-made rifle in lieu of the government buying handmade rifles, which now means if a rifle broke, you didn't have to replace the whole rifle, you just had to replace a part of the rifle. And it's this idea with regards to the rifle and interchangeable parts will leave other industries to do the same thing. You had workers working at a station, 12 to 14-hour days, and again, lots of children and women in the factories. Poor conditions, no workers' rights, just not a really good situation for the workers at all. They had no representation to take their concerns to management or, in most cases, to the government. And it's not until you get to the late 1800s, early 1900s, that you really start to get the union movement to try to fix this, along with the progressives, which is something that you'll get in 1302. All right, so let's take the last look at this piece. The last part I want to talk about is a movement of writers, poets, and philosophers. And what they're going to do is they are going to argue that in lieu of all this industrialization and mechanization, society is now starting to become dehumanized. And what they're going to do with their philosophy, their writing, and speeches and such, is they said American society needs to get back to nature. And this back to nature argument, for the most part, is going back to Eden. It's a return to Eden. Much like when we studied the philosophers, you had Rousseau saying that for man to be free, he has to return to nature and return to Eden and reject technology. These guys, for the most part, are going to argue the same thing. Quit the rat race, quit the pursuit of wealth as a path of fulfillment. If you go back to nature, you find yourself. If you find yourself, you'll find God. You're seeking peace and harmony. This movement is going to be very strong in the New England states, namely New Hampshire and Vermont. And some of the philosophers that are going to be very prevalent during this period is going to be Henry David Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Robert Frost. Now, Robert Frost is going to come on much later, but he still fits this genre of writers. Now, interestingly enough, this transcendentalism is also going to create the first real genre of American literature. Again, this is much a byproduct of 1850s all the way past the Civil War and up until the 1900s. And again, some of these transcendentalists are also going to be a part of a group of writers that fall into the category of metacognition, or the metaphysics. And what they are going to do is they're going to really start taking society and taking a look at it and from an intellectual standpoint. And one of their big things is metacognition and introspection. And again, this is really our first real real facet of literature, as compared to most of the literature that we've been getting that comes from England, France, and other parts of the world. This is our first real nuance of having our own form of literature. All right, so this covers chapter 9. I'm going to go ahead and post this for you. I'll work on the next section and have that posted shortly.